Okay, thanks for coming to this session. We're going to wait a couple of minutes to see if anyone can is joining us later, and then we'll start. Thank you. In the meantime, you can use the chat if you want to say anything, or you can, for questions, there's a Q&A that you could use. Just give it a couple of minutes before we start. Thank you. Okay, I think we can start now. So this topic title is Feminist Translation po-Sovietski. I'm just going to explain what po-Sovietski means before I start. Po-Sovietski just means in the Soviet way. It means in the Soviet way, po-Sovietski. Okay, so let me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about translation because translation usually it's done within a context. So I'm going to give you briefly a little bit about the context in which the novel I'm going to show you were translated, and then I will explain, giving some example, and then I will end up with a conclusion. But before I start talking about the context, I just want to run a quick poll. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you a question. If you can answer, please. So that's just a quick poll for you to answer. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes so you can answer that. Thank you. Okay, I'm just waiting for participant to answer the question. Okay, one more. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to end the poll and share the results with you. Okay, so 63% of the audience say that they do support gender equality. Okay, thank you. So I'll come back to this question towards at the end of the talk. Thank you for taking part into this. Okay, so going back to the talk. So let me give you with a bit of context, because as I said before, translation, it's always done within a specific historical context. So the novel where I've discovered example of feminist translation, there were novels from African women, fiction translated into Russian during the Soviet Union. And what was happening, so I'm giving you a bit about the translation scene, what was happening. So it was translated in the 70s, 80s. So there were lots of things happening then, especially affecting women. You have, for example, there was a UN Decade for Women, 1975, 1985. There was what we call Soviet Committee for Women, led by Valentina Tereshkova. She's the first women astronaut, as you might recall. And also the Women's International Democratic Federation was also doing a lot of work between women from the global north and the global south. And then you also have the feminist dissident movement led by Tatiana Mamonova, who was then she was exiled at some point, and she left the Soviet Union. So all this were happening at the time where the novel were translated. Okay, and one of the translators I've interviewed as part of my research, her name is Arkhangelskaya. This is what she said. She just confirmed what was happening. She's saying that at that time in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was such the situation was such that they wanted to translate anything from everywhere just to get Soviet people to discover um, um, the world outside their own borders, discovering literature by other countries. So, and I'll also give you just a brief overview of what we call feminist translation, because the title of my talk is Feminist Translation by Sovietski. So I have to give you a little bit about what we call feminist translation. So feminist translation is a theory, it's also a practice. It was established in the 70s in Canada, and the main idea behind this practice is that when you translate as a feminist translator, you translate women in a way that is empowering, to empower them in translation. So anything that is any example of sexism or any example that is offensive to women, so you can change that. You can translate against the text to make sure that women are represented in a better light. So that's the idea of feminist translation. I want to give you that kind of a brief idea, so you know what to expect. Okay, so before I show you the example of feminist translation I've discovered, I wanted to just to tell you the data where they came from. So basically, I looked at literature by African women in French, translated into Russian. So the example I'm going to give you, they're taken from these three novels. The first one is from Lemsin, La Chrysalide. The other one is from Une si longue lettre, from Mariam Abba. The other one is La Grève des Battus from So Far. So those are the novel where I took the example I'm going to show you. Okay. So the first example I want to show you is this one. So I want to go straight into practice to show you how they translated the example, which I call feminist from the 21st point of view of feminist translation. So look at this example, for example. You have ST is the source text, TT is the target text, so where it's going, and CT is the close translation. So I'm starting by giving you the source text, so what I found in the original French text. And then CT is the English translation. So if you don't read French, you can read CT, which is the close translation of the original French. And then the target text, the TT, that's the Russian translation of the French. And here, again, I'm giving you, I'll just move that forward. And the CT here is the close translation of the Russian version, okay? So let's look at this example. Cette passion pour tout ce qui avait trait à la vie de Faiza, elle était sa chose. So here in the source text, a woman, Faiza, she has been described as chose because she was as if she's the man's property, which can be some sort of objectification, and therefore that might be offensive to call a woman, you know, a chose, a thing. So, but in the Russian version, you have ко всему, что касается Faizi, you have творение, I put it in bold, творение. So creation. So the Russian translator have changed shows to творение, creation. Okay, so you see this is an example of feminist translation where you translate against the language. So you try to change the language to represent women in a positive way. As an example of that. And as part of my research, I've interviewed those women translation, those Soviet women, because it's Soviet women I spoke to. When I asked them, so can you explain why you've done this? So the explanation, for example, I quote from Trinkina. She said that в данном случае по-русски вещь имеет уничижительное значение. So you say in that case in Russian, a thing is already has some pejorative meaning. So that's her explanation. But she doesn't see it as an example of feminist translation. I see it as a researcher, as someone who analyzed it. I see it as an example, but her explanation is that it is uh, um, already a bad word, so it has to change. So, but what she doesn't what she doesn't know is that an example can be considered feminist translation as well. But she said that she's conscious that that representation must be changed. And another woman I asked us the same question. She said that ni nada unijat, nada чтобы звучно по-человечески. So there's no need to humiliate. You have to translate. You need to sound human. Okay, so you can see this human dimension. She's following that human dimension, and she's becoming an agent for change. But they don't see it as example of feminist. But I'll explain that later why they don't see it that way. So another example of feminist translation I've seen in the data I have. Let me give you another example. This one. Again, here, you see, mot tu dois aider chanter si tu crois que j'accepterai que tu me traites comme un vulgaire objet. Here you have vulgaire objet. Again, it's a wife. The wife is protesting, telling her husband, why do you want to treat me like a vulgar object? Okay, why? So if you look at the Russian translation, so they have removed the word vulgaire. Okay, they left a thing. So when I ask, because I'm giving some direct quotes of those women translators. So when I ask one of them, so why have you removed vulgaire? Her answer was это лишнее. She said that object, it's already ascarving, it's an insult already. So it's already a bad thing to say. So to add vulgaire, it's just make it worse. So therefore it had to be removed. So again, you can see they're trying to do what we would call today feminist translation, but they did this translation in the 80s in the Soviet Union. Okay. Another example, because I'll give you a few examples, then I will summarize. Another example, this one is from Mariam Abba novel. You say here, je n'ai jamais conçu le bonheur hors du couple. Okay, you can read the English one here. And then if we see the Russian version, it has completely changed. So in the French version, this woman can't see her life outside marriage. She can't see her life outside marriage. But in the Russian version, the idea has been challenged completely. Okay, so according to my analysis, this is because if we follow Bolshevik women ideology, marriage contract, marital contract were considered as a form of oppression. Okay, so the idea of having someone locked into some marriage, some contract, you know, it's oppressive. You know, so in the Russian version, the woman here it's a little bit it's kind of freed. She's a bit. They have changed that idea that you can only stay because you know they're free that woman, and these are according their own analysis, according their own feminist would I say thinking, according to their own thinking. So again, it shows that they're portraying women in a way that will look more or less like themselves. So according to their own ideology. And again, this also can consider this for my analysis also an example of feminist translation, because they are, if we follow the Bolshevik women ideology, this is freeing the women, and therefore it is an example of feminist translation for that perspective. So let me give you another example. This one is en vérité l'instruction d'une femme n'est pas à pousser. So in English, actually a woman does not need too much education. Okay, so that's the Soviet idea. Women don't need too much education. It's a statement we find in the source text, but the Russian, the Soviet women, because we're talking about the Soviet time here, so the Soviet women has challenged that. So во всяком случае не будешь как некоторые monoteizikom sutra da večera i za to toliko im деньги платят. So if you read the English translation, in any case, you will not be like others. So that's a completely different idea. So it's a challenge. Why? Because the idea that women cannot aim for higher education, it's a gender insensitive statement that will not work in a Soviet context. Because in the Soviet Union, women had access to higher education very long time ago, before even women in the West that had access to education quite a while ago. So and also Soviet Union were so in Soviet Union there was a system allowing people to go to higher education for free. So the idea that women can't need higher education is just not going to work. Therefore, she's changing it. So and that is something that feminist translation does. So it can translate against the text as long as you can transform some stereotypes about women, some ideas that are patriarchal, some ideas that are offensive to women. And that's what she's doing, the Soviet women translation. She's telling that idea coming from the source text. Okay, so one more idea, this again relates to education, also coming from a Maramaba novel. So you have in the source text this sentence, ta mère était plus préoccupée de faire bouillir la marmite que d'éducation. So the woman here wanted her daughter to get married. Okay, so she was to lift her out of poverty. So she was worried about feeding herself and her children. But if you look at the Russian version, у ее матери просто не хватало времени ей заниматься. So the Russian version, it's kind of it's changed the idea completely that somehow that women should be focused on material wealth, okay? Because hey, I remember she's being lifted out of poverty. It's material wealth, okay? And again, putting material wealth above intellectual wealth, it's also something that wouldn't quite work in the Soviet Union because, as I said before, education was free. You know, intellectual wealth matters more than material. So, so from that perspective, the Soviet women has changed that idea, and somehow, as if they, you know, excusing that woman bad behavior in a way. But in a Soviet translation, she's less materialistic, which is a good thing. It's a good development because the Soviet Union, you know, it's feminism, you know, the idea of being together. So you cannot part of socialist values. Okay, so to put material wealth above everything wouldn't work. So she's portrayed as less materialistic, which is a good development. Again, from that point of view, that translation can be considered feminist because it's changing the woman, the translation of women in a way that is positive for the target audience, because in feminist translation, the target audience is very important because you are translating for a certain audience, and that translation should work for that audience, and you can change things because what you want to achieve is also equivalence, but it's not equivalence or fidelity to the source text, but it's to translate women in a way that is positive. Again, positive here will depend on that specific context. So what is interesting here is that Soviet women employ feminist translation strategies without consider themselves feminists or embracing their ideology, because from the interviews they would deny they were not under the influence of feminists. But for my analysis, as I've shown you, this example can be considered example of feminist. They are actually example of feminist translation, but they themselves will not see it in such a way. Okay. Okay, so and they've used what we call in feminist translation, women handling the text. So women handling means just to translate in a way that will, again will be positive for women, and which women need to ask yourself. This is to work for Soviet women in Soviet society. So that's the key findings. Okay, now I want to share with you what's their attitude to those to their own attitude towards feminism. So this is a quote. It's quite long, but I thought it would be useful to share this with you. It's a quote from one of the Soviet women I've interviewed, and what she said is, I've asked her about feminism, what she's thinking about that. She said that I never felt, so to speak. So she said for her, she was living in a country where there was equality, the society had achieved equality and all that. So she believed in that gender equality, but that wasn't complete because we know patriarchy was still there in the Soviet Union, but she never felt it, in that way. And also, what's important in her quote, she said that it annoys me. So you can see the anything to do with feminism for Soviet women, it's the main reason why feminism annoys them or they resent feminism, because first of all, if we go back to Bolshevik women ideology, the difference is from Bolshevik women point of view, they were fighting two systems. They were fighting patriarchy. At the same time, they were fighting the class system. Two systems of oppression. But women in the West, they were only fighting patriarchy. So that's the difference. That's the difference between the, and that's why one of the famous Bolshevik women, Alexander Kollontai, said that feminist, it's bourgeois women trying to fight, patriarchy, but they're not fighting the class systems. So that's the key difference between those women. That's the key difference. And so that's one explanation, okay, why maybe my interviewee doesn't like feminism. That's one explanation if we go back to women. But another explanation might be that anytime feminism comes with some set of definitions, some ideas, feminists overreact, they're radical. So feminist does come with a lot of ideas, and people don't want to identify with. So that might be another reason. But certainly, Bolshevik women ideology has got some part to play from the very beginning, because according to these early women, Bolshevik, they didn't like feminism because they were trying just to fight patriarchy, but not the class system, which was another oppressing system. But she was aware, because as I said, the translation I took from the data is from African women fiction. So, but she said that she was aware that that those issues in the text, because those texts they were texts by women, and they're considered also feminist text. So, but she said she was aware that issues in the text may have been important. So feminist issues might be important for those writers writing at the time. So that's an example of a feminist consciousness as well, that she was aware that, while translating, that there were issues that were important to the women writers. So that's just to sum up, this is the attitude, so they don't embrace feminism, they don't identify, but if we look at the example I've showed you previously, those examples are indeed example of feminist translation, even though that they are not feminist, and they were certainly not under the influence of feminists, according to themselves. So what are the implications then? So this shows us the importance of identifying and supporting feminist ideas in any discourse. I know I'm using the Soviet case as an example, but it shows that in any country, everywhere, we must support feminist idea, and we must find connections, because yes, in the Soviet context, they don't see themselves as feminists, but what they did in the text, as I've shown you, the example of feminist translation, even though they don't consider themselves. So we need to find those ideas in any country we live in, whatever in any discourse, we might find example of that. And also, it's good to do this kind of examination because it to show people that who often say see feminists as a alien, and that's not just in the Soviet Union or in Russia, if you want to say. There are many countries out there where if you say feminist, they will just say, "Oh, it's a Western thing. It's something imported." But what they fail to do is to look at feminists around them. As I've shown you, the Russian women also will say, "I'm not feminist," but I can show them this example. I say, "Look, you are not feminist, but this example, there will be considered. There are examples of feminist translation, even if you don't." So we need to examine this so we can see connections, even though we are not we don't identify ourselves as feminists. That's why I asked you at the beginning the question: are you a supporter of feminism or gender equality? So for Soviet women, clearly they were supporters of gender equality because that's how they see themselves. They see themselves as equal to men. They see themselves as equal to men. And I've shown the quotation from Maria Arkhangelskaya. She said, I live in a country, I didn't feel any feminist issue. I didn't feel that, So for her, everything was good. She was equal. So it wasn't perfect. We know that. And we know the patriarchy was still there. But that's how she see herself. And that's what they see themselves. So another application is that is a memory. And this is very important because Pussy Riot, if we might remember, they were interviewed in 2012, and they were asked, who is your what major influence? And the response, it is on my slide. They name Simone de Beauvoir, so they name a lot of women, inspirational women, rightly in the West, but they failed to name, they failed to look feminists around them. They didn't mention figures such as Alexandra Kollontai. Alexandra Kollontai, she's a feminist, she's an activist, she lived in the Soviet Union. So, but those young Russians, they're not mentioning. So they see as role model Judith Butler, Beauvoir, which is good. I'm not saying it's bad, but what I'm saying is failing to notice feminists around you, that will lead to what that's something that we need to change because and here I'm bringing Sheila Robotham quote. One of the major weaknesses that leave political movement vulnerable to misinterpretation and defeat is that they have no way of handing down memory. So the history of their struggle is easily forgotten, and that's what's happening. Those Pussy Riot members, they don't know about their own pasts. So they don't know about Alexandra Kollontai. So they need to find that strength. And if there's no way past feminists are passing down the baton, if you want, to new generation, then that struggle, history of struggle, will easily go forgotten. And then we end up having people saying, oh, feminists, it's imported, it's not ours, because people are just failing to look at feminists around them. Okay, so it's very important, crucial, and this can be applied to any context, because there are many countries out there that will find example, not just in translation, but in many other areas. You can find example of in translation or activism. So it's important to also pass on memory. So in conclusion, I'm coming back to the question I asked you at the beginning. So I'm curious to find out if you have changed your your position, or you are still, or you will not answer differently to this question. So I'm curious to know that. But what I will say as a conclusion is that we must be agent of change. That's important. So whether you consider yourself a supporter of feminist ideology or just gender equality, I think what is important there is just to be an agent of change. And we can see those women, those Soviet women translators, I've shown you an example, didn't see themselves as feminists, but in translation, at least they did challenge some idea that were gender is sensitive, or just idea that were protecting women, portraying, women in a not in a good way. Okay. So thank you for your time. And if there's any question, I'm here to answer them. Thank you. You can use the Q&A. If there are any question and comments, you can ask in the chat or the Q&A. Any comments? Okay, thank you, Paula. That's a good question. Paula is asking, how did you get into feminist literature? Thank you for that. I always get asked that question because, as you say, I'm a man, and I would say that I came into feminist. My interest into feminist came quite late in life because I am a translator, and when I was doing my master's in translation studies, I just wanted to have the diploma to do my work as a translator. But as I was doing my master in translation, I had an assignment I did on Bible translation, on gender neutral Bible translation, and I looked at some of the example in Ezekiel, like referring to women as 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 use a very strong language to refer to women as I don't know, slut or something like that. So it was very kind of so, and that shocked me because I'm a Christian. It shocked me. First of all, and then I say, you know why, and this is why, as a practicing Catholic, that was my own idea. I say, this is why, as a practicing Catholic, we don't have women who preach. We don't have women preach in the Catholic Church. So I wonder why. So if you have that language in what we call the Holy Bible, so that was my conclusion. So to me, this is why we don't have women priests, because clearly, women are seen as as not worthy of bringing the gospel, which to me was horrifying, because if you look at the first person to meet Jesus when he came back to life was Maria. When she's the one who brought the news that Jesus was alive, and that I've seen her is not in the grave anymore. So that woman brought what we call the gospel, the news. So I'm like, so that was my, and then I decided to do more and more research on women writing, women literature, because I find that interesting, and I find that as a man, I think if we also need to get more men into kind of looking at this issue and then sharing with the audience. So that's how I came into, and the more I was doing it, the more my interest grew, and I ended up doing my PhD again in looking at women fiction and how they are being translated and all that. So that's why I came into feminist literature. Hope that answers your question. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else got any other question? Question or comments? You can feel free to use the Q&A. Okay, so there's a question: what Russian translated feminist literature do you recommend for those interested in reading? Okay, very interesting question. Hmm. Okay, I recommend the writing of Alexandra Kalontai, just because she's one of she's a well-known. If you want to find out about um, Soviet in general or Soviet women ideology, I'll strongly recommend the works of Kalontai. And there are many writers who have written about her, because she has written many articles as well. So there are authors, I can't remember, but they have written different books about her writings. So if you read her, then you understand uh, um, ideas, and also you can understand better um, how people think in Russia today. Because remember, Soviet Union was 70 years of, so that's quite a long time. And so if you read her, it'll give you an understanding of what those Soviet women wanted to achieve, because she's one of the greatest figure. And in terms of um, in Russia now, I don't really know, if I'm entirely honest, because my work has focused more on the Soviet period. So I can only recommend Kalantai as someone you can read just to understand um, that's um, that's Soviet women ideology, which is very interesting. Thank you. Okay, we still have some time if you want to ask a question, or feel free. Okay. Would you say that any feminist movement in the West were influenced by the Soviet feminist movement? Hmm. Okay. Very interesting question. Uh, well, what's for my own research, I won't say that, but what I will say is there were there are I see similarities, because sometimes we don't notice that. There I can see similarities in the way in some ways. But I'm saying no because I don't have evidence of that. Maybe someone else, but I didn't see any evidence that way. Um, that anything in West were influenced by Soviet feminist movement. But Alexandra Kollontai, she's certainly a well-known figure even in the West. So some of the ideas she expressed in her writings um, uh, are relevant to women, or to us, who are in the West. They are relevant. Some of her ideas, even though she was expressing those ideas in her own context, but some of them, they are um, uh, applicable um, to us. So Yes. So yeah, there are similarities. There are similarities. For example, if I can go back to the question, I mean the differences. You know, the Bolshevik women, they wanted to fight patriarchy and class system. Okay, so and they were accusing women in the West just to fight patriarchy, but not the class systems. But if you think about it, the class system in the West. Today we talk about you know, we have working class, right, in the West. We have people who are working class. We have so we still have that class system, you know, in our capitalist society, which one way or the other we are still fighting. Okay, so some people are in the working class. They want bigger wages. So we are, so I see similarities. That's according to my analysis. I see similarities there, even though ideologically they call themselves communist and we call ourselves capitalist. But we are fighting a class system in our countries, and we have groups in the West who take issue with the class system. So yes, they might not have influenced directly, but I can see something that I can see there that can help me to understand better the system I'm living in the West. So that's what I would say. I hope that gives you some answer your question. Yeah, feel free to ask as many as you want. I'm here to answer questions. So if you know, yeah, you can ask. Okay, that's a very interesting question that I would like to explore and see if it is still practice. Because I'm keen to do more research, looking at transition happening now in today's society, to see if it's still happening. Because what makes it different is those women are using feminist translation without seeing themselves as feminist. That's why I say Sovietski. So it might be happening now in Russia. It might happen in a different context. So, but I'm sure you will find it in other contexts, not just Russia, or not, in any country you can find that. Because at the beginning, when I ask you, are you a supporter of feminist or gender equality, the majority of you say gender equality, and that's exactly what Soviet women told me. They said they support gender equality, not feminist. And because gender equality, there are many supporters out there in different countries, and I'm sure you will find this example of feminist translation, whereby you have people translating using a feminist translation strategy, but they will never say to you that I am a feminist, because they're not doing it in the name of feminism, but they're doing it in the name of gender equality. So therefore, yes, absolutely. You will find example of translation Sovietski style in many other different contexts. I'm sure you will find that. Yes. Okay, I think someone wants to talk. You can talk, Lorenzo. I just seen that. Oh, no. That was me. Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, feel free to ask any question if you have, or okay, this is another question from Paula. So she's asking, did censorship affect this form of translation at all, or was heavy censorship over by then, seeing, as you say, by Soviet Union in general, in far in general, in reading far beyond borders by the end of the 20th century? Okay, so thank you for asking the question. Censorship, that's a good question, because um, censorship, we first of all need to distinguish. First of all, let me just start straight away by saying, yes, ask that question to those women in censorship. So the answer was that it was only censorship um, related to um, um, things that has got to do with that have some a sexual nature. Okay, that was the only thing they mentioned to me. You know, things with a sexual nature. We know in Soviet Union for a long time. You know, they're trying to avoid that. So that's the only thing that they say that they knew they had to maybe you know, be careful. But other than that, um, they say that, you know, they had the freedom to, censorship was only related to that aspect. That's it. But they were very much their own agents, because I was also in a way surprised, because when I asked them, did your work had to be changed after you translated, they say no. I am the translator, and I had the final word. So if someone, the publication will be done, will be published under my name. So if I don't agree with the editor, then I will not. If I don't agree, I don't agree, because I had the last word. That's what they told me. You know, I had the last word. Prava всегда оставался за переводчиком. That's what they told me. Prava всегда оставалась за переводчиком, meaning that the translator, you know, had the final word, because she said to me, the publication, the translation will be done under my name. So I had the last word, and that was something that's surprised me, because I was also thinking that, you know, because you know, the editor would be changing things and all that. They said no, they had the last word. So that was something that I discovered. So they had a higher degree of agency. So, and censorship was only related to things with a sexual nature. Other than that, it wasn't. They could translate anything they wanted to. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, you're welcome. We still have 30 minutes, so feel free to add more questions. I'm here to answer any clarification you want. Okay. If there are not any question, then I think thank you very much for coming, and um, I hope I've answered all the questions. But you can always contact me if you need any, if you have any more questions, or you can ask now. I don't know if anyone has got any final question or comments. Okay, looks like no. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, and I wish you have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you.